Welcome to I Got a Guy podcast, a podcast carefully designed to introduce a wide range of very talented and highly skilled professionals ready to share their knowledge and advice with you. Please welcome the host of I Got a Guy podcast, Michael Drelichars. Welcome to I Got a Guy podcast. I'm your host, Michael Drelichars. Thank you so much for being with us. To our loyal subscribers, we really appreciate you subscribing and listening to our show regularly and sharing the content with your friends and family and your coworkers, etc. Every week we try to bring on a different guest from a different genre, different industry, different market segment, to always keep it varied and different. So we try to be unique and bringing in different topics. And I think this week will be no different. I'm sure you'll enjoy our guests that we have lined up for today. If you are new to I Got a Guy podcast, I encourage you to go to igotaguypodcast.com. That's igotaguypodcast.com. You'll see a list of all of our previous episodes and a quick little synopsis about each one of our guests, along with contact information if you want to reach out to our guest and find out more information about their industry segment, their business, etc. This show, as you know, was born out of a book I read called The Go-Giver. And as small business owners, we all know how important networking is to growing our business. But one of the fallacies in networking that is often thought of is that networking is all about getting referrals. But the reality is the way you truly grow your small business is to give referrals. And hence the book Go Giver. There's interesting stories there about giving and how business grows from giving. So I love the story. If you haven't read it, I encourage you to download it, read it. And I've internalized it, and it actually is how this podcast got started. So I like to give back, and I love small businesses and side hustles and entrepreneurial spirit in general. And so I'm always looking for new guests to have on the show. So if you are interested in being a guest on the show, I encourage you to reach out to us through igotaguypodcast.com and let me know your story. Let's talk about how you can be a guest and how we can get you integrated to here and get you into our audience and for our audience to start listening to what you have to offer. So, but in the meantime, let's get started with this week's guest. Here's somebody that I've met just a few months ago, but he has a really interesting background and a really interesting little side hustle business. I can't wait to introduce him to you. So, if you would help me welcome Nick Fratto with NickNack Games on eBay. So, Nick, welcome to the show.
Michael, thank you so much for having me. And I love the name and the premise of I Got a Guy, right? For I Got a Guy podcast. As an Italian American myself, I have uncles, ton of cousins who, hey, we got a guy. You need help with something, you got a guy, right? So that phrase is thrown around a lot in my family. So it's it's so great. Yeah, I was gonna say it's so great.
Yeah, I got a trademark now, so I get to collect royalties.
Perfect.
Exactly.
I was going to say, yeah, well, just let us know what that royalty rate is every time we mention that.
Exactly.
But yeah, no, so happy to be here. Thanks for having me on, and excited to talk all things gaming.
Absolutely. So you're a gamer. You've been doing gaming for a while. Just tell us about your background and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. My wife likes to say I'm like a well-rounded individual in the sense of all my hobbies and interests. Gaming is my number one passion and actually what I do in my day-to-day full-time job. I work I work for an ad agency who specializes in securing partnerships for a number of different gaming publishers. So that's what I do on a daily basis. But I was just well dipped into the gaming industry ever since I was a little kid. And I to this day cannot live without games in my life to some degree, right? Sure. Knowing as I get older and finding less time, and as you know, I have a son on the way, so I'm probably not going to have as much time getting into games as I've used to want to do. But in general, just the idea of gaming and where gaming's come from, has always been a strong passion of mine. So growing up, I remember my first video game console was the Nintendo Entertainment System that my father had. I was about 4 years old when I jumped into Super Mario Brothers, but I vividly remember playing that game and touching the controller at such a young age, and then proceeded to get my own Sega Genesis as I turned 5 and 6, and then my love of gaming just got fed even more as my father saw that I was really interested in this, right? So long as I was doing well in school, I was a very active kid as well. We come from a very athletic family, so I was always in sports. But anytime I wasn't throwing the football, hitting some home runs on the baseball diamond, I was inside playing video games and really buying into the media that is video games, right? Storytelling, the graphics, the entertainment itself. I was hooked to it and drawn to it, and it extended far into that too, because with gaming, it's so community based. I mean, ever since dating back to the days of the arcades, like there were arcade gangs or teens hanging out in the arcades all day, right? And that camaraderie has not changed at all, even in the day of internet, right? There are different channels and social media outlets where people are forming their own communities based on the games they love. So I've been in this for a long while, and it was with that love of gaming that kind of got me into the idea of collecting gaming and preserving old video games, getting really into the retro market, just because physical media is dying. You for the most part, there's ebbs and flows, right? So we're in the digital media from like the music standpoint with streaming and so forth, even though there are still a ton of people pumping out vinyls, but CDs are not relevant anymore, really. And it's the same with gaming. Games are now heavily digitized. So you're a lot of, Gen Z and younger, and sorry, this is like a long-winded way of telling my backstory.
Keep going.
But it's with that where, retro game collecting is so important, and why I wanted to get into it as I got older, not just because I wanted to collect games that I remembered as a child, but knowing that there's going to be a time where my son, the games he purchases are going to be pretty much all digital. And I'm starting to even do that in my age as a gamer, current age as a gamer. I have a Xbox that is full of just digital downloads versus the countless number of CDs and CD cases that I own that contain games. So it was that I realized, like, hey, I really want to build a library of many different consoles and games. And then it got to a point where, you know what, I'm starting to get a lot of duplicates and I'm starting to find some things in the wild that, maybe I can grab these things, clean them up a bit, and then, of course, resell them, right? Make a buck into my hobby. But not just as like looking at, and I never looked at it as like, hey, I'm going to get rich off of this, because there's so many different, people reselling video games from brick and mortar stores, as we talked about earlier. And then, of course, the countless eBay stores that do retro video game sales, and other companies. But for me, it was more, I'm going to be the small guy in the large pond of game resellers that actually is a gamer himself and like very dedicated, knowing that this isn't going to be my bread and butter, how I'm surviving daily. This is more of like, I'm going to do my hunting like American Pickers, find some rare games that get me stoked, and then be able to resell them at what they're worth to other gamers. So that kind of birthed NickNack Games, and got me so excited to have this side hustle that I'm able to keep up with and not get buried with it, right? But still have that love and passion of the industry that I'm working in currently, but also that I've known and loved since I was a child.
Right.
So that's how I got here.
Yeah, it's remarkable when you think about it, because you're really trying to preserve something that you're so passionate about, and I love that aspect, because a lot of people, go into a business, whether it be a side hustle or a full-time business, in an effort to make a living. And that's all fine and good. We all need to make a living. We need to support our families. We need to grow, et cetera, and pay for our housing and everything else. But when you can take a passion of yours and make a few dollars and help preserve that legacy and help other people preserve, take advantage of it and enjoy it, that's remarkable. That is really fun. And I can imagine, if you go to garage sales, you probably see boxes of old games that, Atari games or Commodore 64 game or whatever they might be, that somebody's had, an inch of dust on them because they were sitting in the closet somewhere for years, and they may actually be worth some money.
No, 100%. And it, just like in any market for collectibles and memorabilia, the price charting changes almost, quarterly. So Atari and Commodore games and anything that was in the 70s to the 80s are actually, believe it or not, are very easy. They're easier to purchase. They're definitely skewed cheaper, right, than what you are seeing with the video game consoles that were birthed in the late 80s and 90s.
Is that right?
Even now in the early 2000s for millennials, like young millennials, their consoles, that's where the money's at, are those or those generations of video games. But yeah, Atari, there was a time when it was the Ataris, the Commodores, and Intellivision, so
Right.
forth and so on, that were the hot commodity. But yeah, those are now are more like CRT TVs where don't have too much of a use of them, just because. And to that, it's because the games were so simplistic, right? And they're very minimalistic in a sense that, as fun as they were back in the day, there's so much more fun forms of the media,
Sure.
of the medium, right, that people gravitate towards. You're going to get bored playing Pong, right? Versus with Super Mario 64, there's a game that has 4 hours worth of gameplay baked into it. So
Is that right?
but yeah, it's ultimately, it's like, even still, you see all these Atari carts found at somebody's garage sale. One of those carts, it's like striking gold. You never know what you're going to find in those situations. And again, another reason why I love doing it is it's just fun. It's fun hunting for this media.
You're looking for the diamond in the rough, essentially.
Always. Always.
So,
I
when you go searching for these, where do you go? Do you go to thrift stores? Do you go to garage sales? Do you look online? What do you do?
Mm-hmm. So a little bit of everything, but when I first started getting into retro game collecting, it really was thrift stores. So your Goodwills, Salvation Armies, mom and pop thrift stores. I was over in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm blanking. Savers, I think it was. It was the thrift store. There's some out here too, but it really was thrift stores because the thrift stores themselves saw this, these carts, these CDs as old relics. So they weren't doing the research behind it of like, hey, this is actually worth X amount.
Sure.
So it was easy to buy and find games in that capacity.
Yeah.
But nowadays, because of how retro gaming has exploded, they're not even keeping those games out, and they're actually reselling them themselves. Believe it or not, Goodwill has an equivalent to an eBay store,
really?
And they're reselling the games for the actual price of what they can be worth. So I kind of stopped going. I rarely go to thrift stores now, and mostly it's when the garage sale season starts in the summer. I go online. There's like garagesalefinder.com where you can, and I write out a list of stops, right, of where I'm going to go and which suburb, right? Because those are where garage sales are where you're going to find like a mother or a father tossing their kids' games out.
Sure.
That, again, they're not doing the research you hope, right? And I say this not because I don't want to like screw somebody over either, right? That's not my intention at all. But it's also like I'm trying to find a deal for myself so I can resell it, but not astronomical price of what you're seeing in brick and mortar, because the brick and mortar stores and a lot of resellers who are doing this as they're, trying to survive and their bread and butter, they're going to sell for 10 times the amount of what I would sell it in my shop on eBay, right? Because I'm, again, looking at it through the lens of preservation and from like a fan standpoint.
Right.
So yeah, garage sales, thrift stores, flea markets are a lot of fun too. And while I'm doing this, because I'm also into toys and the collectibles, I'm essentially Tom Hanks from the movie Big. When I'm going hunting for video games, I'm always stopping and looking at, oh, wow, he had a whole table full of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle action figures. Here's some Transformers over here. Man, this is really cool. And it all kind of coincides with like my interests and hobbies. And you'll see occasionally in my store that I will throw up Pokemon cards or stuff that is relevant to gaming, even though it may not be gaming too.
Interesting. So how do you stay current with what the true market value is for these things if they fluctuate so much?
There are a number of websites. One of the core sites that essentially a lot of collectors use is called pricecharting.com, and it basically keeps track of where the game's reselling either on eBay or on OfferUp, and it kind of finds the median value of like, what's this going for, right? Where the auction's capping out at. And that's where it like turns into of like, gives you a number of, okay, this game's worth $30, right? Based on, okay, it's been selling for $30 pretty consistently, the average price that it's selling at point. So it will house that from like a loose cart perspective. So I'm actually showing a visual for those who are actually watching the YouTube. So this is a loose Game Boy Advance game,
Sure.
right? I think the loose price for this specific game, loose meaning not in its original box, it's just the actual cart itself. The average, I think, selling price on eBay is around like $30-$40. So I'll price it $10 below or 15 below to start, and see, if someone could get a find, right?
Sure.
I think something I just sold recently, it was a 45 average price for a loose cart. Somebody ended up winning it for $20. And to me, that, like, I'm not hurting for that. Like, oh, it's like, oh man, I didn't get exactly what it's worth. But good on that collector who's getting that, which I'm hoping they're not reselling,
Right.
right? If you're buying it, I'm hoping you get it in your collection and you're going to enjoy it.
Sure.
And it ended up being a find for you.
Do you get a lot of bidding wars on some of your items?
I do, depending on the rarity. So most recently, I listed original cart of Mega Man for the NES. That cart's going for like $100 loose. Right up to the very end, there's people just going back and forth on the price. And the person who got it around its average, but it was a really clean cart. It was and this is sort of like a success story in my mind, is like I try very hard to clean these carts as I find them. This one just so happened to be one that I actually purchased for my own collection until my cousin gave me a complete in box version of that game out of his old collection. So I was like, okay, I don't need two, right? Again, duplicates. Sure. And this one I already have like the completed box. So I was able to, resell a mint copy, which this person raved about and gave me a great feedback on eBay.
But and you test all these before you send them out?
I do. Yeah. So I pretty much have every console under the sun. You can't see it. Well, actually, yes, you can right now. Again, for people who are watching on YouTube, there's a small CRT TV next to my work monitor, and I connect all the old consoles up, and I play the games and just make sure that they're running and there's no issue with it. And if there is, I refund. Again, like I'm not trying to be a stickler.
I can imagine that would be one of the hesitancies when you're buying it, is you want to make sure you're not buying a pig and a poke and end up spending $20 or $40 on a game that when you get it doesn't work, and now mm-hmm. So the fact that you go through and you verify that the games are in fact legit and they work and they're clean and they operate properly that's really important.
And
the industry, the
100%, and it weeds out the people who are just shipping something in a jewel case. The biggest difficulty for me are the games that are not carts, right? Carts were built to withstand damage and they're more durable, but CDs, right? So you have CD decay and everything that you got to fight. So you have to keep these CDs in great shape. I think that's the hardest too of reselling CD-based games. It's just sometimes you're going to find a game in the wild that's in good condition, but there's still surface scratches on it. And you just kind of have to, test it, make sure it works, but then be as transparent as possible. And I, as a business, just somebody who is a good human being, like I'm 100% in open communication from start to finish with these games, right? Give them the best description as I can based on how I'm pulling them in, where I'm pulling them in, so people are aware of where I've gotten it, what kind of content or condition the title is in. And then I ship, I keep anytime I'm buying a game myself, I keep all the packaging too, and then repackage as professional as possible. If I could do this, like if money was not an issue, I would love to do this 24/7 as like my main job, but obviously I can't. But I'm going to go out of my way to make it seem like I'm running a professional shop in my home office. So I'm going to package and I'm going to be, in complete conversation with you from when I go to the post office to when you get the title.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
That to me, that it kind of cements my love for gaming, right? And just I'm passionate about the games that I'm sending the customer or the other collector, because I would want the same thing. And I've had experiences where I didn't get it, and it leaves like a salty taste, right, in the community.
Absolutely. That's a really critical. Nick, we're going to take a quick break here in a second. Before we do that, why don't you share your information? If somebody wanted to reach out to you, if somebody's listening and they may have a passion, they might maybe want the a game for PS1 or something. You probably have some of those.
Yeah.
How do they reach out to you, and maybe just find you on your eBay store, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. So my store is fairly in its infancy. It's only been around for about 2 years. Right now, I've just mostly been doing flash sales. So I don't have right now. I have 2 games on the store up for sale. But when I say flash sales, it's based on what I'm getting rid of in my collection that month and where I'm going. Right. If I went to garage sales in June and got a bunch of games that I want to put up for sale, I will make sure that gets announced through eBay and posted online. But the primary way to get in touch with me is through email. I have my own store email. It's NickNack Games, all lowercase. It's NICK, obviously my name, Knack Games 90@gmail.com. So NickNack Games 90@gmail.com is the main store email. Please, customers and fans of gaming can email me about, ask questions, because I do have, if nothing's on the shop, it doesn't mean I don't have stuff. It means I just haven't posted anything. So any inquiries about, hey, I'm looking for this game on PS1, I 100% may have it. You just have to ask me. And then that way we could either, I could sell it to you, or, hey, are you a collector yourself? I'm always looking to do some swaps too. So I really do try my hardest to bring it's a business, but also a hobby. And I want to keep it that way, where I'm not trying to, again, become a millionaire in this situation or make the biggest buck on these rare titles. Like, I want to pad my collection and do my preservation, but equally be able to, keep the industry moving.
That is tremendous.
So
that's awesome. So we'll take a quick break here. We're going to come back and continue chatting with Nick here about some other ideas and collectible things that are hot in the market. So stay tuned with us. We'll be right back after hearing from our sponsor, and we'll continue with Nick Fratto here from NickNack Games. Be right back. Thank you for listening to I Got a Guy podcast. I hope you're getting a lot of knowledge from this week's guest. But now a word from our sponsor. If your business uses heavy equipment as part of its daily routine, sadly, I don't need to educate you on the reality that this equipment has been the focus of many local thieves either. Precise Fleet Tracking Solutions works with business owners that own commercial vehicles and heavy equipment. We help these business owners enhance their growth and profit through the use of GPS tracking technology. Recovering a stolen asset is just one way we contribute to the bottom line of the business. Our GPS tracking units used in heavy equipment are weather tight so they can handle the elements and even have an internal battery to continue to report its location should the battery in the asset be disconnected. We have several examples of the benefits of GPS tracking in heavy equipment. Reach out to Precise Fleet Tracking Solutions for a detailed discussion about our options and to see if it makes sense for your business. You can find Precise Fleet Tracking Solutions at precisefleettracking.com. That's precisefleettracking.com. Or call us at 847-865-6008. Precise Fleet Tracking Solutions. GPS tracking made simple. Now, back to the show. Okay, we are back. I am Michael Drelichars, host of I Got a Guy podcast. Thank you so much for sticking with us. This week we are speaking with Nick Fratto, who is the owner of NickNack Games. He is a video game connoisseur, preserver, fan. I'm not sure how else you want to classify yourself, Nick, but thank you for being with us this week.
I think you hit the description correctly. No, connoisseur, lover, fan, all the above. my buddies who do a podcast about just fandoms overall in the entertainment industry, they whenever I come on, they call me their video game historian, because again, not only am I preserving, but I'm constantly just consuming just data through archives, learning about the industry in its infancy and where it's at today, and then obviously being in it full time, I'm constantly having to just see where we're going, not just from a marketing lens, being part of the marketing agency that I'm in, but just in general, wanting to stay on top of it for my own doing, as games are evolving and what I'm putting on my store. So,
well, it's interesting. I have a classic car, and so when I speak to folks, when I'm looking to buy a specific unique part, I'll find people on eBay sometimes, but even Facebook Marketplace or wherever. And then you start, sharing ideas, and hey, well, I'm looking for this thing, and they may not advertise it, but they're like, oh, I know somebody here, and there's always a passing of information back and forth. It's an interesting, subset of individuals that are passionate about the same thing, and it sounds like the gaming industry is very similar to like that.
Oh, very, very similar. I mean, pretty much I would say 99.9% of the people that work in the industry are in it. We're gamers first and foremost. So it's a constant stream of just people coming in, having whatever their experience and knowledge is of the industry and sharing it internally and externally too.
Yeah.
Not just with, the people working in it, but with the fans. Because again, it's, and I like to say it's a lot for a lot of industries, but there's still the dark side, just same with like the music industry and Hollywood and entertainment and film. But outside of that, I feel like the core, at its core, the gaming industry is very communal. And people that just want to do this because they love it. So you see a lot of that passion in the industry.
And it's interesting when I think about, I have an old PS1 machine myself, actually, that is probably 28 years ago, old now, 30 years old.
Oh yeah, I would say, I want to say it came out in the PS4 or PS1 was 94.
Yeah, mid 90s.
So
30 years ago.
94, December 94 in Japan, and then it was came to the States 1 year later in September of 95.
Yeah, I think my kids plugged it in once or twice, and I have a handful of old games with it. And they had the Wii system when it first came out.
Mm-hmm.
And my thought, because I'm not a gamer, I mean, I enjoy playing the video games a little bit, but I don't get that deep into it. But my thought was that once the new system came out, the old games are almost disposable because the new stuff is better technology, better graphics, the software development, the interaction, the story behind the game, everything about it is, when you go back to some of these old games, like, holy cow, it's so pixelated. And at the time, we thought it was cutting edge technology, which it was. But compared to today's technology, it's like, that is so yesteryear. But I'm amazed that there's such a market and a community around the old stuff like that. I'm surprised.
Oh yeah, 100%. And it didn't, to be completely transparent, it's like I know, from what I know, it didn't become a thing, this whole idea of, I mean, there was always the people who wanted to preserve history. I feel like that is just in any art form, right? So in what you see in museums and so forth. But retro gaming and retro game collecting honestly didn't really blow up until, I would say, almost the aughts of like 2010, 2009. There was a community, but the prices weren't astronomical. People were, thrift stores again weren't hoarding their own collection to sell on their resale shop. Like, it was, to your point, hey, we moved on to the newer, better thing. Right. So this is essentially almost obsolete in our minds if we're not gonna go back and play our old systems. So yeah, it was just almost disposable in a way until people were hungry for the simpler times, right? And that's the core idea of nostalgia. And nostalgia hit big with gaming, and again, that's how I got into it.
Last 15 years.
Sorry,
the last 15 years or so, it's really
awesome. Yes. 100%. I want to say the cutoff is 10, 15 years. Once a console hits the decade mark, it becomes classified as retro. So right now we are in the era where Xbox 360, Wii, and PS3 are actual retro
Interesting.
commodities, which is wild. Because I was in high school when those games came out, and to say that they are not, man, not to date us both, it's crazy. It is absolutely crazy.
I
But
find it fascinating. And my guess is that there are other retro toys in general that are probably in the same genre, right? You mentioned,
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there's other things that, if they're 10 or 15 years old, might actually be more valuable than most of us average folks would recognize.
100%, and I think it's my generation's doing, because we are just wanting everything we grew up with, right? And so you'll see a lot, at least nowadays, there's a resurgence of that 90s nostalgia. But I feel like that was the case too, and for those who were more adult in the 90s, right? There was a lot of love and nostalgia for the 70s
Yeah.
and the 80s. I feel like you hit kind of like that trend. And right now it's 90s and early 2000s. So, but now with the access of the internet and the ability to actually put a value to that nostalgia,
Right.
brands are buying into it or trying to find ways to buy into it to make a simple buck. Like there's reissues of old Ninja Turtle action figures that Playmates is doing that are new molds, but almost identical to what they were selling back literally in the 90s. And then to your point, Pokemon cards are just they're hitting the new generation with the new era of Pokemon. As more and more Pokemon come out, hitting a different age group, but there's still the millennials buying and selling and collecting it based on just pure nostalgia. So it's a trend that just is continuing, and I think it's always going to continue. Gaming just so happens to be in its, I mean, like a core of that, and why, again, retro collecting and retro gaming is so massive right now, and why they did, just talking about PlayStation, there was a couple years back, Nintendo was releasing like miniature consoles of the old consoles that had 20 digital games baked into it. PlayStation did that with a PlayStation Classic. It bombed because it was just not well produced. But it's the idea of people who don't want to spend astronomical amounts of money to find these rare titles, but still want that scratch that nostalgic itch.
Right. Now, what about these arcade games, the freestanding games, um, Gold
Yeah,
Key, and some of these other games that have been around for 20 plus years? Do those have value as well?
they do. Yeah, it's a different market for sure. Obviously, because arcades are at this point, arcades as we once knew them are
Yeah.
gone for the most part. You see in today's day and age, the Dave and Buster's pop up in the world, which are more quick forms of entertainment. Those games are mostly ticket grabbers or kids to get, pop in a quarter or swipe your card and you're going to spend 2 seconds trying to win tickets, right? That's more inclined to what you're seeing in the arcade
Exactly.
space
Yeah.
now. But arcades ruled the world, right? That was the main form of video game consumption, late 80s to the 90s. And so there's all these arcade machines that have gotten produced that are still floating in the world, right, and being traded amongst people who want to preserve that side of the gaming industry. Yeah, there are certain like machines that were not produced heavily in mass quantity that are worth insane amount of money. Are people buying them as much and frequent as your console carts and CDs? No, not at all. Just because of space. A lot of people. That's the thing, right? Exactly. The moving it, having the logistics behind. We might have to tap into Precise Fleet and tracking to get these arcade machines to my house or my basement. But that's why. I don't know if you're familiar with the company Arcade One Up, which I absolutely love. They blew up about a year and a half ago, but what they've been doing in their business model is, hey, there's a whole, slew of gamers who grew up in the arcades but want that experience at home. So they made almost identical replications of the old machines, but scaled down that you could assemble yourself like IKEA
Oh, really?
furniture, but it's the same internal hardware of what the game was, but just scaled down to fit your apartment.
Yeah.
So they've blown up. They've done like NBA Jam. They've done Golden Tee, which I actually have in my basement. So you know, since we're neighbors, come check that out. So and they've just been doing a lot of fun stuff with that. And I've been, you know, as somebody who grew up around the arcades and not just in his living room playing his consoles, you know, that's, you could ask my wife. I'm like dying for like 5 of these machines, and they go for around like 300 to 500 based on what the game is. So it's fun there because now you could actually get that experience and don't have to shell out the $20,000 of this rare arcade machine that's out there.
Yeah.
But I vaguely remember one of my good friends back in the day when I was a kid. His father had a full blown arcade in his basement. He had some pretty rare cabinets and titles there. I feel like that's what started retro game collecting, was collecting arcades first, like arcade machines. Sure. And then it, you know, obviously translated to consoles.
Yeah, I remember back in the 80s, I grew up here in the area, and there was Mother's Pinball was in Mount Prospect, and we used to go there on the weekends and, you know, plunk our quarters in and, you know, wait in line to play the Pac-Mans and the different pinball machines and the Tetris games and all that, you know. But that was it was a long time ago.
It was a fun era for sure. I mean, there is a arcade museum, which is also a running arcade in Brookfield called Galloping Ghost. It's one of the United States' largest arcades and arcade preservation sites. Have you? Yeah, I was gonna say, have you been there? It's really cool. My wife and I have, but it's like rows and rows of arcade machines, and it's so hot in there because the amount of energy running off of the monitors and the machines. But it's just so cool, and you can get lost there. And for somebody who, you know, is passionate about gaming, like, again, arcades kind of started it. And I want to say, I mean, it's the exact same thing for retro game collecting and selling. Arcades were the first to do it.
So is that repeat the name of that place in Brookfield again? What's it called?
It's called Galloping Ghost.
Galloping Ghost. Is that just a museum, or is that they sell the games there too?
So I think you could actually inquire there on their website. If you go, you could inquire about what they're selling. They do sell and trade their machines because they do cater to that market. Sure. But for the most part, it's a working arcade and museum. So like each machine will have the year it was made, and so all that information for you to kind of digest and be like, okay, oh, what is this game? This game's called Bubbles. It's about making sure your bubbles don't go down a drain. Like, who made this game, right? No wonder why it didn't sell, and why is it still around here? It's crazy though. I mean, it just there was a 40-year war on pinball, I think, from like the 30s to the 70s in New York and Chicago. I think pinball was banned because we're talking about communal, like, yeah. And this is complete side tangent, but just how hardcore gaming is in general. There was a ban on pinball machines because they promoted, I want to say, like, deviancy and just people congregating, gangs congregating, and fighting, loitering, and, you know, getting crazy, right? Because it was competitive though, too.
Yeah. Well, it's a fascinating market. I haven't thought about that market in such a long time. I really appreciate you bringing these stories to the table here and sharing with our listeners.
Oh, absolutely.
That's amazing, and I'm happy to learn about your passion, because I love what makes people tick and what's driving you behind the scenes, and I think that's awesome. Glad we were able to have this conversation. Any other stories of successes you want to share before we wrap up our show here?
No, nothing that comes to mind immediately. So just so everyone's aware, my store is NickNack, NickNack _games. If you type that in the search bar on eBay, that's how you can find my store. I have 2 titles up right now for sale. It's talking about flash sales. One is a complete in-box copy of Twisted Metal. totally ignore the $2.99. So this is actually a good kind of visual representation of where retro games were, right? So this old game store, this is a sticker from, I want to say, GameStop. They were selling this at $2.99.
Originally.
This long box Twisted Metal game is worth on average, and since it's complete in box, so the manual, the CD, the box, and it's in decent condition, this is going for like $130.
Wow.
So people were throwing it out, as you can see, but now it's worth tons. Reason also being PlayStation in its infancy, before they adapted the jewel case, they were selling games in these long boxes, almost like bookends.
Sure.
And so you don't see these a lot because this was right when the PlayStation debuted in '94. The first run of these games were all in long boxes, hence the rarity on these. So this is up on my store right now. And then a loose cart of WarioWare Inc., which is a wonderful, wonderful game for the Game Boy Advance. So that's currently what's going up on there. So if you search NickNack _games, and I'm sure, Mike, you'll put this in the description.
Absolutely,
too.
Yeah. It'll be on the screen.
You guys could check.
For our YouTube and Rumble viewers, you'll see this information on the screen, but it'll also be in the show notes, so you'll be able to go right to it. But that's fascinating. Fascinating industry that I had no idea was out there. So it's only growing. I will leave you with one final story of just my hunting. One of my favorite things was I found an old game. I was at thrifting, doing my finds, and there was an old Game Boy bag, right? Like a holder for your Game Boy. I didn't see any games or in it. I just bought the bag because it was like super cheap. It was $2. I go back to my office. I actually did it during my lunch break on one of my during work, and I open it up, and there's like 7 Game Boy Advance cards. So I have no idea they knew they were in there, and it was like a bunch of rare titles that I was able to keep in my collection and sell a couple of them. So that was fun. You run into situations like that, like you're just rummaging around, you see something that may be a throwaway, and then it ends up being a lot of money. And there was a time where I found a box, and this is crazy, Mike. I kid you not, cardboard box, a beat up cardboard box of a game that is ultra rare on the Nintendo 64. That box beat up sells for $100 itself. Just the box, not the game. So a piece of cardboard. I found that at some garage sale. It was wild because there's that game in question called Super Bowling for the Nintendo 64. There was like barely any made. So that was like a holy grail find. But it's just so funny. It was just the box. And I was hoping they had the game. They didn't have it. But you got to know what's out there. Obviously you've got decades of experience, so you know what's hot and what's not hot, or what's going to be hot, or what was a rare edition, maybe more valuable.
Yeah. No, 100%. That's where the experience comes into play too, of just this hobby and the store, and making sure I'm getting the right stuff, putting on eBay for fans.
That's awesome. So cool. So NickNack _games at eBay is your store. NickNack.
That is my store.
Okay.
Yep.
So to our listeners, if you're just curious, if you want to go relive your childhood, go to NickNack _games, see what he has out on eBay. Reach out to Nick at nicknackgames90@gmail.com if you have any specific requests or interest, or you just want to chat with him about some of the topics. I'm sure you'd be willing to have a conversation.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, I run this business as a fan first. So, if there's anybody that wants to get together to swap, to chat, to talk about the industry, I'm always
That's
available.
Awesome. Nick, thanks so much for joining us this week. Thank you for sharing your story with me just last weekend and come up with this idea to join the podcast this week. So thank you for that. And I'm hoping our listeners are enjoying all the new information, because we haven't had a gamer on before. So this is new. We did have another guy that is a thrift store guy that buys some. And if you go back to our archives, you'll find Thrift Store Dave. Similar story, but different industry segment. He does neckties and hats and all kinds of different things, watches and stuff, but not the video games. So that's fascinating sub-market. Nice little,
It absolutely is.
little side hustle.
Mike, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it. And thank you all to the listeners for tuning in and learning about video games.
So as we wrap up here, I'm just going to throw in a quick little plug for Precise Fleet Tracking, as I always do, because that is my day job. This is my side hustle, my little way to give back to small businesses. But Precise Fleet Tracking Solutions is my day business. And we work with business owners that own commercial vehicles. And we help these business owners enhance their growth and profit through using GPS tracking technology. We got a lot of stories of companies that have benefited tremendously by using our technology. The knowledge that our technology provides is been really valuable. So if you happen to own vehicles, a fleet of vehicles, could be 2, 3, 4 vehicles, doesn't matter how many, more the merrier, but it could be a small fleet as well. We'd love to have a conversation with you about how Precise Fleet Tracking Solutions can help your business. So I encourage you to reach out to us. You can find us on our website at precisefleettracking.com. That's precisefleettracking.com. Or call us at 847-865-6008. It's 847-865-6008. Get the conversation started and see if we can provide some value. So, all right, that's it for my plug. But again, thank you, Nick, for joining us. To our listeners, thank you for paying attention this week. And I really encourage you to share this story with your friends, your family, your neighbors, your buddies. And when you do reach out to Nick, let them know what you heard about him here on I Got a Guide podcast. Great way for us to connect the dots and know where our opportunities are coming from. So we'd love to promote his little business as well. So for all you, thank you, and look forward to speaking with you again next week. So take care, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you for listening to I Got a Guide podcast. For past podcasts and more information, go to igotaguypodcast.com. That's igotaguypodcast.com. Please share this podcast on your social media feeds and tune in again next week to I Got a Guide podcast.